One of my favorite ways to come up with project ideas is to look at other stores. Today I have 3 projects that were inspired by things that I saw from 3 different stores. Hey everyone, welcome back to Glue La La. My name's Jess and I love to make home decor on a budget, and if you do too, then let's get started. On a recent trip to Joann Fabrics, I saw this really cute sign and I really liked the little bundles of dried flowers on it, but I did not love the $29.99 price tag, and on this day it was 40% off, which still would have made it $17.99, and I felt confident that I could recreate it for a lot less. I started by taking a piece of box art that I found at the Dollar Tree. This one had a little raised 3D fox in the center, but it was pretty easy to pull out. It was just laid on there with some foam, and I wasn't worried about covering up the background because I knew I was going to do that later, but I did want to change the color of the frame itself to an elephant gray by Waverly. After my coat of paint had dried, I took one of these adhesive cork sheets, also from the Dollar Tree, and I measured the inside of my box. Now, depending on what type of box art you use, you'll have to come up with your own measurements, but I just took a rough estimate of what the inside of the box would be, and then I used a pencil to draw out the size that I needed on the cork sheet, and I cut it out with scissors, and since this was already adhesive, I didn't have to add any extra hot glue or anything to stick it to the inside of the box. On the same day that I took that picture of the piece of art that I liked from Joann Fabrics, I also found this bundle of greenery, and a lot of times I buy my greenery from the Dollar Tree, but I really liked this bunch. There was a lot on it. I think originally it was priced at $9.99, but it was also 40% off, so I got it for $6, which I thought was a pretty good deal. So I took 2 little sprigs of the greenery out of the bunch, and I just tied them together with some jute twine, and I made sure that I cut off the end of the greenery where it connects to the stem, because it kind of makes it look more real if that isn't on there. And the other thing that I really liked about this greenery is some of the sprigs kind of looked like herbs to me. Some of the ones that I had tied together in the bunches I thought looked a little like rosemary, and I really liked that. So I created 3 bunches that would fit across the width of my box art. Next, I used some hot glue to attach my little bundles to my box art, and I had 3 of them, and I spaced them out first to get an idea of where they needed to be. But whenever I need to space things out inside something, I always like to start on one end and then I glue the one down on the opposite end, and then that way I can adjust the spacing for the one in the middle to make sure that it looked pretty even. The last step was to create the phrase that went inside the box, so I used some permanent vinyl and I cut out the phrase "Keep Life Simple" on my Cricut. That was the phrase that was originally on the box art, and I really liked that, so I kept it the same. And if you have a Cricut and you want to recreate this, the 2 fonts that I used are the typewriter font, and the script that I used is called DTC Cottage Style. I wasn't sure if the vinyl would actually stick to the cork, but it did pretty well, and I'm sure you can see here that both of the dots in my eyes are missing, and I was able to find one, but I couldn't find the other one. So to create the little dot over the word life, I just used a white gel pen to fill it in, and I got lucky because most of the greenery kind of covered that up, so you couldn't see it anyway. If you don't have a Cricut, you can always use some letter stickers, or I know a lot of people are really good at hand lettering, which I am not. But if you are good at hand lettering, you could also just hand letter this in for yourself. If you like to see projects like this where I recreate things that I found in the store, then make sure you give this video a big thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and if you're on social media, I am on Instagram at gluelalacrafts, so come follow me over there too. One of the websites that I like to go to for inspiration is Wayfair, and I saw this really cool piece of macrame and fiber art that I liked, but at $70.99, I did not like that price tag. And when I checked recently, it was actually on sale for $63.99, which is still way out of my budget. So I decided to try and recreate it with things that I mostly found at the Dollar Tree. I started with 2 of these signs. These are actually garden stakes, and you can see I did pull the stakes off of both of them, and I needed 1 of the shower curtain rings, some yarn, and 1 of these adhesive wall tiles. Looking back on it, I probably only needed 1 of these circular signs, but when I started creating this, I thought I needed the wood to be a little thicker, so that's why I used 2, and I just used some hot glue to glue the 2 prints together so that both sides of the sign would be blank. Next, I took the sticky wall tile and I laid my circles down on the adhesive side, and I cut out the circle shape with my utility knife. Now, if you can't find these wall tiles at your Dollar Tree, you could also use some of the removable wallpaper they have, or some of the contact paper. Or another thing that I think would look really cool in a piece like this is to use one of those sort of rattan placemats that they sell from time to time from the Dollar Tree. I haven't seen any at my store in a while, but I know around Christmas they had some red and green ones, and in the past I've bought other colors there too, so hopefully they have some coming out for spring. Next, I took the shower curtain ring and I made sure that the ends were closed, and I started with a really long piece of yarn. It was way too long, but I started by using a little hot glue and just gluing it to the ring, and then I started wrapping it around the ring. And eventually I ended up cutting some of the yarn off because it was just so long I couldn't wrap it around the ring very well. But I just took my time and I made sure that the whole ring was covered, and because this yarn is a little chunky, it actually went pretty fast. If you're going to use just a regular type of yarn, I would recommend maybe doubling up the strands, because then it won't take you as long to wrap it around the ring. I pre-cut out 6 strands of yarn. I can't give you an exact measurement on these. I just kind of did 2 of my arm lengths, if that makes any sense. I'm 5'4", and they say, like, you know, from the tip of one finger to the tip of the other finger is your height. So probably when I stretched these out, it was probably about 5 feet, and I did that twice. So I'm going to say that each piece of yarn is about 10 feet long. And I found the center point of each yarn and I fed it through the shower curtain ring, and I just pulled the ends through the loop. So that way it attached to the shower curtain ring. And like I said, I cut 6 strands out because I'm going to show you how to do a little rope braid here in a second. Once I had all 6 of my strands hooked onto my shower curtain ring, I took another piece of the yarn and I tied it around the top just to help bundle all of the strands together. And I wrapped some of the excess yarn down about, I would say, 1.5 inches, just to give it a more interesting look. And then that way it helped all of the strands in one little bundle, so it would be easier to create the braid. I took my shower curtain ring and I used some painter's tape and I taped it to my work surface to make it easier. So you can see I have the strands separated out. I have 6 off to one side and I'm working with 6 to start. And the way you create a rope braid is you take 3 of the strands in one hand and you twist it in one direction. So in this case, I'm taking the 3 strands on the right side and I'm twisting them to the left. And then I take the strand that's on the left side and I cross it over the right hand side. So you can see here again, I twist it and then I cross the left piece over. You can do this with any type of yarn, but like I mentioned in the beginning, if you're going to use regular yarn, I would probably double it up so that it's a little thicker. And the reason you're doing it this way is because when you twist the ropes in one direction and then you cross the other ones over in the other direction, it kind of locks it into place and it gives you that nautical rope look. So I did that on both sets of the strings. So I did it down one side using 6 strands, and then I did it down the other side using 6 strands. And this is going to go around that wood piece. And I just held them in place with some clips at the bottom until I knew exactly how much of the length that I would need to go around my circle piece. And in the piece that I drew the inspiration from, the piece from Wayfair, it was it was a little bit more of a complicated, sort of knotted look on the rope. I don't really know what to say, but it kind of reminded me of when I was in elementary school and my friends and I used to make friendship bracelets for each other. So if you still remember how to do that, or if you know how to do regular macrame, you could use that technique also. I just like the rope braid because I think it's kind of interesting and it goes along pretty quickly actually. And for those of you that don't know, I actually work full-time as a hairdresser, and this rope braid is something that I do a lot for updos for proms and weddings. So it's always fun for me to be able to bring my full-time job into my part-time YouTube job. So once I had my braids down to a length that I liked, I just centered the shower curtain ring at the top of the wood circle, and I brought both of the braids down using some hot glue around the edges of the wood rounds. And this is where I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I probably didn't need to glue the two wood rounds together. I'm sure I could have just used one of them, but originally I thought I would need a thicker wood piece, but I think I didn't need to. So if you can only find one of these wood rounds at your Dollar Tree, you'll be fine just using one of them. To finish out the bottom of the piece, I took another strand of that yarn, and once I had the two ropes glued around the edges of the circle, I just used this other piece to tie the bundle together, and I wrapped it around a bit. I didn't do it quite as long as I did on the top. I just did a couple wraps around, and then I cut the fringes off. Now, the way I figured out to cut my fringes, because I wasn't exactly sure how long I wanted them to be, and of course you could make them any length you wanted, but I measured from the top of the wood round up to the top of the shower curtain ring, and I used that same length for my fringes because I thought it would give it a more balanced look if the fringes on the bottom were about the same length as the shower curtain ring was from the top of the wood round. I felt like this piece needed just one more embellishment, so I took a few sprigs of some different greeneries that I had on hand, and I hot glued them together. Then using that same yarn again, I just wrapped it several times around the center, and then I took the bundle that I had created and I hot glued it to the top. That way it kind of covered up that little bit of raw wood that was sticking out at the top. I thought these decorative orbs from Kirkland's were really cool, but I did not think that the $89.99 price tag was all that cool. I started by taking one of these floppy hats that you can find at the Dollar Tree. They have them in several different colors. I only bought one, and later I wished I had picked up a few more because I could only create one of the orbs out of one hat, and when I went back later to get more of the hats, they only had pink ones left, so I didn't want pink orbs, but I'm going to keep my eye out for more of the natural ones. I zoomed in here because I wanted to try to show you that these hats are woven together with a clear type of thread, almost like a fishing line. And if you can slide your scissors right underneath that fishing line type thread, you're able to just unravel these hats very easily. You don't have to use a seam ripper or anything. Like I said, I just snipped the little fishing line threads, and then I was able to unravel this entire hat. The only problem area was where they have that little flower glued on, but it was just a little hot glue, so I was able to pull it off pretty easily. I laid my chopping mat down on my cutting mat because I didn't want to run the risk of seeing any kind of like marker or pen lines on the chopping mat through the material that I got from the sun hat. So I used my cutting mat as my guide so that I could cut 3 strips that were about 1.25 inches in width, and they were the whole length of the chopping mat, which I'm not exactly sure how long that chopping mat is, but like I said, I wanted to cut 3 strips that were about 1.25 inches, and I used my rotary cutter here, and I thought it would have cut the whole way through the chopping mat, and it didn't quite go through, but it did give me a line. And once I pulled the chopping mat off of my cutting mat, I realized if I just bent it back and forth a little, the chopping mat kind of snapped off where those lines were scored from the rotary tool. I took my chopping mat strips and I formed them into a circle, and for this first circle I overlapped the 2 ends by about 1/4 inch. And the reason I measured it is because I want to vary the sizes of the circles just slightly. And I don't think hot glue sticks very well to the chopping mat, so that's why I chose to use my tiny attacher. I usually have that linked in my description box, so I'll make sure I have this little stapler linked down below, because the staples are a lot tinier than a normal staple. So for the second ring, I overlapped the two ends by about 1/2 inch. So it was about 1/4 inch overlapped more than the first ring. And then for the third ring, I overlapped it by 3/4 inch. That way, whenever I went to put the 3 rings together to form the orb, I knew they would all fit inside of each other. Now all I needed to do was wrap each of my rings with this ribbon that I got from the sun hat. I balled it up so that it would fit in between the rings, and I just used that tiny attacher again to attach the end of the strip to the ring, and then I was able to just start wrapping and wrapping and wrapping until I had each of the rings covered. This was pretty quick to do. It didn't take very long, and I know the hot glue doesn't stick very well to the chopping mat, but it will stick a little. So after I got about 2 or 3 inches wrapped, I took a little dab of hot glue and I just put it on the inside just to help make sure that that sun hat ribbon wasn't going to slide around too much on the chopping mat rings. Once I got to the end, before I added the final few wraps, I did use my tiny attacher again just to staple it in place, and then I used the hot glue on the inside, and this time I knew it would stick because I was actually gluing that ribbon to itself, not to the chopping mat. After I had cut off the excess, I was like, oh my gosh, this would be the cutest little bracelet. So that's another little gift idea. If you're looking for something for a friend, you could make little bracelets out of these chopping mats and the sun hats too. After all 3 rings were covered in the sun hat ribbon, all I had to do was crisscross them, and I made sure that I had the the right size in the center. And I used a little hot glue because, like I said, I knew it would stick because the ribbon was going to stick to itself. And I crossed 2 to form an X, and then I used the third one to glue around the center of the other 2. Thanks for hanging out in the craft room with me today. I hope you liked all these projects. Let me know in the comments which one was your favorite. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.